I was born in Rome, within walls steeped in history and power. My father was among the most influential senators, and my mother often declared that my life would be devoted to a singular purpose, upholding the family's honor and fortifying its standing. I was raised with the conviction that my sentiments held no weight, that my destiny was already inscribed, that my sole purpose was to become a worthy emissary of our lineage, to cement political alliances, and to fulfill my duty to society. I knew my life would be bound to whomever could advance our family's interests, not to one who might quicken my pulse. At 17, my father began his search for a suitable husband, not one I loved, but one who could bolster our position. His gaze upon me was icy and calculating, and I understood that to him I was merely an instrument through which he sought to expand his influence in the Roman Senate. My obligations seemed indisputable. I could not defy my father's directives, for they were not merely his wishes but my sacred duty. I was a daughter of Rome and thus bound by its laws and traditions. Yet at the time I could not fathom how profoundly this would clash with my own yearnings and dreams. Then I met him. Our paths crossed at one of my father's receptions. He was a soldier, invited to participate in the training exercises of the Roman army. His face was stern, his eyes brimming with resolve. He lacked the wealth of my other suitors, no titles, no vast estates. Yet something in his gaze ensnared me. He did not know who I was, nor did he seek to find out. My family's connections and political alliances held no interest for him. He looked upon me simply as a woman, not as a senator's daughter, not as a means to an end, but as a person whose feelings and desires mattered. Our conversations began as effortless exchanges about Rome, its people, and life itself. His manner was unpretentious. He spoke without artifice, his words direct, his gaze unguarded. And in his eyes I saw something I had long craved: freedom. The freedom to exist as myself, without pretense, without masks. I sensed his genuine interest in my thoughts. He listened, and that alone was extraordinary. Our meetings grew more frequent, though clandestine, hidden from my father and his circle. Yet in those stolen moments, I dared to imagine a different life, one where I could stand beside him, a man who saw not an heiress, but a woman. But I knew it was all in vain. My duty to my family eclipsed my desires. My father would never sanction such a union. He would never permit me to bestow my heart upon a man without title or influence. I was bound to obey his will, even if it meant extinguishing my own heart. He became my most guarded secret, one I could share with no one. We met in stolen moments, yet with each encounter, the weight of concealment grew heavier. Every second spent with him was laced with both rapture and anguish, for I knew that eventually I would be forced to choose, my family or him, and that inevitable choice loomed as the cruelest trial of my life. My father spoke increasingly of securing a suitable match, a man who would fortify our political alliances. It was expected, yet unbearable. I knew my consent would never be sought. My fate had already been sealed, and it held no place for the one I loved. Each day the conflict within me deepened. My affection for him intensified, yet so did the awareness that defiance could unravel generations of my family's legacy. How much was I willing to sacrifice for him? And if I lost everything, would he be worth it? My heart roared, yes, while reason whispered, you cannot. I could not linger forever in this limbo between duty and desire. But how does one endure when love becomes the very rhythm of one's breath, the compass of every step? With time I realized I could no longer bear this torment. Yet I also knew my choice would shatter not only my life, but the lives of all around me. I remember the beginning as if it were yesterday. That evening when I first saw him not merely as a soldier of Rome, but as a man who might claim a place in my heart. The reception in my father's hall brimmed with laughter and calculated conversation, where power, wealth, and status were the only currencies. In that world of intrigue my feelings were irrelevant, yet he stood apart, speaking quietly with fellow soldiers. His face bore the stern weariness of a man acquainted with battlefields, but his eyes held an arresting honesty. I noticed him instantly, not for his stature, though he was tall and commanding, but for his bearing. He sought no attention, no validation, a rarity in Rome. He was alien to the hollow theatrics of high society, and I felt drawn to him as one is drawn to the unknown. Strangely, he noticed me, too, not as a senator's daughter or a political pawn, but simply as a woman amidst the glittering crowd. When he approached, the world dissolved. His voice was quiet, yet assured. He spoke not of politics, but of earth and sunlight, of how, after months on campaign, he could finally smell the sea again. He asked nothing of my lineage, my prospects. He merely listened as I spoke of Rome, and, astonishingly, his gaze held no appraisal, only warmth. With every word he spoke I felt an unfamiliar lightness in my chest, as though I could speak freely, without artifice or restraint. This was new. I had grown accustomed to receptions where every glance, every syllable, every gesture was part of an intricate game requiring constant vigilance. But he did not play, and with him, neither did I. For the first time, I simply was. Our conversations began to extend beyond those stifling halls, into Rome's hidden corners where none knew us. We met in the seclusion of his garden, later in deserted alleyways where no high-born spies or servants lurked to betray us. With him, I felt a freedom I had never known. He became my sanctuary, a refuge from the chains of my world. Our talks were so effortless, so real that everything else faded. He spoke of his campaigns, of the brothers in arms who had stood beside him in battle, of laughter around campfires and the crushing loneliness of vast battlefields. I told him of Rome, of my father, of the political machinations that had ensnared me, of my yearning to break free. Sometimes when our eyes met, the world stilled. In his gaze I saw not mere interest, but something deeper, a quiet guardianship. He listened even when words failed me. He neither judged nor sought to mold me. He simply stayed. This was revelation. With him I could exist without pretense, no roles, no masks, and in those stolen hours I forgot my duty to my father, the inevitability of a loveless marriage. My thoughts became filled with him, until I understood. He was no mere interlude. He had become my world. I knew the peril. Every moment with him risked everything I had ever known. Yet there was no question I would gamble it all. He was the first to make me feel not a senator's daughter, not a political pawn, but a woman entitled to her own heart. These emotions could no longer be concealed. They had seeped into my very being. Yet no matter how I tried to dismiss it as fleeting passion, the truth was undeniable. He was everything, and this changed everything. With each passing day, each clandestine meeting, my love for him deepened, even as my mind screamed its impossibility. I was Rome's daughter, a senator's heir, my path already carved in stone. My family could never deviate from its political obligations. My duty to my father was ironclad, his ambitions for me unassailable. My father broached the subject of marriage again, and this conversation came as no surprise. He had found another candidate, a man whose connections and wealth would solidify our standing in the Senate, a suitable match to continue our lineage and strengthen political alliances. I understood this union represented more than mere familial duty. It was an opportunity for my father to consolidate his power. This heavy mantle had been placed upon me, and disobedience was unthinkable. This wasn't simply my decision, it was my obligation. I tried convincing myself this was merely a necessary step for the family's prosperity, that my feelings held no relevance in such matters. Yet the more I contemplated it, the more acutely I felt I would lose not only him, but myself. This marriage would bring no happiness. It wouldn't be my life. I could never become the woman I was with him, the one who saw me as a person rather than a political pawn. Our secret meetings continued in hidden corners where we needed no pretenses. We talked, laughed, shared dreams, and with each encounter I grew more painfully aware of my attachment. This was no fleeting infatuation, but something far more profound. Yet guilt gnawed at me relentlessly. A choice loomed before me. But what if I erred? What if I cast aside my destiny only to end up alone, heartbroken, and bereft of all I held dear? Each discussion with my father grew more oppressive. He spoke of opportunities this marriage would bring, of how it would make our family invincible. Yet his words only resurrected memories of my childhood admonishments. You are part of this family, the continuation of our strength. You must act for Rome. Now I was to fulfill this edict, not merely as a wife, but as another piece in my father's political gambit. I wasn't prepared to become part of his strategy. With him, I felt truly alive. He demanded no false versions of myself, seeing not just a woman to follow orders, but a person with thoughts, desires, dreams. Yet our worlds stood divided. He couldn't enter the gilded cage of my existence, nor would I ask him to abandon his life for mine. When I dared speak of our future, his expression grew sorrowful yet resolute. He understood the impossible choice before me, one that would determine not just our fates, but my family's. The regret in his eyes spoke volumes. He wouldn't have me sacrifice everything. The agony lay in his willingness to let me go, no demands, no interference. He simply promised to wait, should I ever choose him. Yet I could not permit myself such weakness. The choice between him and my family was no choice at all, it was an impossibility. To dismantle everything my father had built would be unthinkable. And in the moment I believed I might decide, I realized I had already lost myself. My life had become a farce where genuine feeling had no place. I was compelled to obey, to relinquish all I had ever desired. The decision I made was never truly mine. It had been forged in the shadows of political machinations under the weight of my father's will. He was certain this union with a man of wealth and influence would elevate our family's power further. And I, as Rome's daughter, could not defy my blood. Yet my love for him, the one who had claimed my heart, did not fade. It festered, growing sharper with every step I took down this unwanted path. Now, as I marched toward a future not of my choosing, I felt the world crumbling around me. My father was not a man to relent, least of all when his ambitions were at stake. Each day his pressure mounted. Every conversation became an ordeal. He was resolute. Obedience was my only course. Love to him was irrelevant. In his eyes I was not a daughter, but a cipher in his political calculus, and that knowledge made me feel like a caged thing. But there was more. Strange occurrences began in our household. Late at night, alone in my chambers, I heard footsteps outside my door, whispers in the dark, as though I were being watched. This was no coincidence. Someone knew of my secret meetings, of my affections. Someone meant to use it against me. I refused to believe my father could be involved. He was a man of honor, though his honor bore little resemblance to mine. Yet the threat was real. He would never risk his reputation for the sake of my happiness. He knew I could unravel his designs if my indiscretions came to light. My father did not tolerate weakness, and if I openly defied him for a man he deemed unworthy, he would spare nothing to destroy all I held dear. One evening, after returning home late, one of my father's oldest confidants came to me, a man I had always trusted. His warning was grim. My father might wield my actions as a weapon. "You tread dangerous ground," he said. "Should your behavior become known, the consequences will be severe. Do you think he does not notice? He watches your every move." Those words rang like a death knell. I understood then that even the slightest misstep could prove fatal. My love was no longer merely a private tragedy. It had become a threat to my very existence. I could not afford recklessness. I could not see him as before. Yet the thought of renouncing him entirely was its own kind of death. How could I exist in such emptiness, knowing I was annihilating the only thing that had ever truly been mine? Yet this was not all. Trapped in such a snare, I came to realize that my own father was prepared to go to any lengths to convince me of the righteousness of his chosen path. He was ready to employ every means, manipulation, threats, even violence, to bend me to his will. And if I failed to comply with his expectations, I stood to lose not only his trust but my very standing in society. To all, even those who once loved me, I might become nothing more than a traitor. Then, just as I had nearly resigned myself to forsaking my love, from the shadows emerged the one who posed my greatest threat. Not my father, him, the one with whom I had shared every stolen moment, who was now destined to vanish from my life forever. He came to me on one of my darkest nights when surrender seemed inevitable, and declared that threats meant nothing to him, that he was prepared to fight. Yet he also warned that if I did not stand with him, I would remain shackled to those who could never understand me, condemned to live a life not my own. He was willing to risk everything to be by my side. I stood before him, and in that moment, I understood the choice was no longer mine alone. I could remain imprisoned by my own fears and hesitations, or I could shatter these chains by stepping into the unknown and fighting for our love. But could I truly defy my father? Could I abandon everything, all for him? The world around me began to crumble like a house of cards. Each day became an ordeal. Every glance, every gesture from my father grew unbearable. I tried to bury my feelings, to flee from thoughts of him. Yet the more I struggled to distance myself, the fiercer this passion burned within me. My love for him could not be extinguished by words or threats, nor dismissed as mere illusion. It was as much a part of me as the air I breathed, the blood in my veins. Yet I knew that unless I acted, all we had built would be lost irrevocably. He felt it too. We both stood on the precipice. Yet every stolen encounter carried the weight of a final farewell. Our secret meetings grew ever more perilous. Each moment together was fraught with danger. We hid in the city's abandoned corners, in the palace's shadowed alcoves, desperate to evade prying eyes. Yet despite our caution, it felt as though we stood exposed beneath a merciless light. At times my heart raced not with exhilaration but with dread, knowing this could not last. And indeed the end came sooner than I feared. One evening, as we met in a secluded garden, he spoke the truth I had long refused to acknowledge. He could no longer endure a world where every meeting might be our last. He would not let me sacrifice my life for his sake. He knew my father would stop at nothing to protect his legacy. And if I hesitated, if I did not choose, all would be ruined. He did not belong in my world, and so to spare me, he was ready to walk away. It was the moment I realized I could no longer linger in the shadows. We stood on the precipice, He tried to release me, yet I could not let go. I could not release him, nor bear the thought of a life without him, hollow, meaningless. Everything I had built, every emotion I had concealed, crumbled like sand slipping through my fingers. I stepped closer, seized his hands, and confessed I could not live without him. That if I remained in this gilded cage of duty, family, and obligation, I would lose all I had ever held dear. I vowed to risk everything, my life, my standing, my very name. I could no longer meet his pain-filled gaze and pretend it meant nothing. He, restraining his emotions, fixed his eyes on mine and whispered that he loved me. Yet he could not abandon his own life for my sake, could not bind himself to this madness. His words pierced like a blade. The world collapsed around me. In that instant, I understood. No depth of feeling could surmount the walls life, fate, and circumstance had erected between us. I stood before him, and every dream that once seemed within reach vanished into impossibility. The foundations of my existence trembled. He left, his final words echoing like a dirge. This was no mere parting. It was annihilation. I refused to accept that all I had fought for was doomed to ruin. What we had built defied reason, yet I came to a bitter truth. Love cannot endure in a world that denies it reality. We were never meant to be. And as he walked away, I felt the essence of my being dissolve. Only emptiness remained. Our romance had not teetered on the edge of destruction. It had already shattered. Yet even in ruin, I knew one thing. I would never renounce what we had shared. My love for him would forever be woven into my soul. But in this world of intrigue and debts, it remained a phantom, too fragile to bear the weight of truth. Now I faced a choice. How to navigate a life among those blind to my heart, who saw me as a pawn, not a person. After he departed, the world turned desolate, frigid. Existence itself felt alien. I mechanically fulfilled my duties, played my part in the future scripted for me, but those hollow days revealed an unbearable truth. I could no longer wear the mask. Every gesture was a lie, every act servitude to others' designs. Torn between command and conscience, I was a specter in my own life. My father seemed oblivious to my inner turmoil. He pressed on with arrangements for my imminent marriage to his chosen match, convinced this union would secure our legacy. Yet for me, it became unbearable. I felt myself dissolving, every cherished fragment of my identity slipping away. To him, refusal was unthinkable. He saw me only as a strategic move in a game where emotions held no currency. But I could no longer endure this existence. My life had been a series of decisions made by others, and I would bear them no longer. In that moment, I chose. I would not wed the man my father selected. I would reject this alliance, consequences be damned. No more would I participate in a charade that left no room for my soul. I knew the repercussions would be seismic. My father would never forgive me. My defiance might unravel all he had built. Yet still, I resolved to follow my heart's command. I could not spend my life cloaked in pretense nor shackled to a stranger. Love is not mere words, it is the very pulse of life. And I knew with crystalline certainty that only with him could I ever be truly alive. When we met for the final time, my composure shattered. I confessed I could no longer suppress my heart. I vowed to fight for us, to relinquish every privilege if it meant freedom to love. Fear had ruled me too long. Duty's chains had choked me long enough. To remain in this gilded prison would mean losing not only him but myself. His eyes mirrored my anguish, yet within them I found the rarest solace, understanding. He spoke no words, but his gaze was answer enough. He would stand with me, defy every threat. surrender all we knew for this fragile chance. Together, we embraced a choice that would cost us everything. Yet as his hand found mine, I knew separation was impossible. The world beyond us blurred, its judgments, its wrath all faded to silence. We were ready. We left without glancing back. The world that sought to break us remained behind as we stepped into the unknown. The future was unwritten, but with his fingers laced through mine, one truth anchored me. I had chosen love. That decision, however harrowing, would define my life. The conflict had ended, though no path ahead would be simple. We faced the age-old crucible, duty versus desire, and emerged with a hard-won truth. To preserve one's soul is paramount. Happiness and freedom bloom only when we dare to heed our hearts. And now, with him, I would rebuild. Not as a senator's daughter, not as a pawn, but as a woman who had seized both love and liberty with her own hands. We braced ourselves for the consequences, though neither of us could foresee what lay ahead. There would be no looking back, no room for regret. Were we certain of our choice? Number yet for the first time the decision was wholly mine, uncompromised, untainted. What existed between us, this love, fierce and irrevocable, could not be extinguished. Rome, the city that had once been our entire world, faded behind us as we stepped into the unknown. All that remained was our resolve, our path, and the fragile hope that we might build something truly ours. We took refuge in a small house beyond the city's reach. Here there were no expectations, no familial pressures or societal chains, no political machinations, no father's despotic grip tightening around my throat. Yet even in this self-made sanctuary, unease clung to me. Sooner or later, the world would learn of our defiance. My father's tolerance, I knew, would not extend as far as I'd naively hoped. The reckoning was inevitable. Months passed. Then one evening, a familiar figure emerged, my father's aged servant, bearing a letter that contained everything I'd feared. Yet the words were not what I'd anticipated. There was no punishment, no fiery pursuit to dismantle my life. Instead, an offer of truce, laced with something resembling regret. The language was frigid, yet beneath it pulsed an unfamiliar admission. He had been wrong. He wished me happiness, albeit with a caveat. If this is the path you choose, know you are no longer part of the world built for you. Not forgiveness nor vengeance, merely acknowledgement that my fate was mine to shape. It was liberation. My father, though unable to condone my choice, had finally understood. I was no pawn. His daughter possessed a will of her own, a heart capable of defiance. The realization must have struck him like a blade. Perhaps he'd expected me to return, humbled by the weight of his influence. But that gilded cage could never hold me again. Time unfolded. He and I wove our lives together in the shadows, sometimes under the specter of old rivalries, sometimes amid the political storms that raged on without us. The tempest had passed, but we now faced the quieter challenge of living in a world stripped of former certainties. Yet the fear that once paralyzed me had vanished. When Rome came calling again, offering a hollow reconciliation, a return to the past, I felt nothing. The woman they sought no longer existed. My father made no further demands. He only watched. This was neither victory nor defeat, but an uneasy resolution, the recognition of my right to choose. In a world of cruelty and calculation, I had claimed my freedom. We lived in the shadows, yet the darkness no longer frightened us. Together, we forged a life where the greatest luxury was the right to be ourselves. Not the future I'd once dreamed of, perhaps, but one shaped by our own hands, our choices, our love, and that, more than any legacy, was enough.